My son splashed the full-bodied Merlot across my face, the crimson liquid dripping from my chin like stage blood. "You're too senile to have an opinion," he shouted, his voice cracking with a theatrical rage. He laughed then, a sharp, ugly sound, and waited for my collapse, my helplessness. But I calmly wiped my cheek with the back of my hand, reached into the inner pocket of my jacket, and took out something that made him scream in pure, unadulterated horror. He most certainly did not expect that turn of events. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in from in the comments below. We love hearing from our community. The figure $750,000 struck me with the force of a physical blow. Then Julian corrected himself. "Actually, Dad, to be safe, let's make it an even million. $1 million for his latest venture." "Dad, I need $1 million. It's an investment in the future," he declared. His voice resonated with that familiar, grating tone of entitlement as he paced across my study, his Italian leather loafers clicking a sharp rhythm against the antique oak floorboards Eleanor and I had painstakingly restored 30 years ago. I remained seated in my worn leather wingback chair by the hearth, the biography of Frank Lloyd Wright still open on my lap. At 74, I had learned the profound value of patience and measured responses. "Son," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "I don't have that kind of liquid capital just lying around." Julian stopped his pacing, his sharp, handsome face, a face I once saw with such pride, contorting in a mask of frustration. He raked his fingers through his meticulously styled hair, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "What are you talking about? You sold your architectural firm for a fortune. It was in all the papers. That money is invested, Julian. It's diversified across a portfolio designed for stability, not sitting in a savings account waiting for your next brainstorm." I kept my voice as steady as the hand I once used to draft blueprints, watching his agitation swell like a summer thunderstorm over the Charles River. "Then liquidate some of it. Dad, this is revolutionary. A blockchain-integrated luxury NFT marketplace. We're talking digital art, exclusive collectibles, virtual real estate. I have venture capitalists sniffing around, but I need the seed capital to prove we're serious." His hands sliced through the air, painting invisible charts and graphs in the space between us. The fire crackled in the hearth, its flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. The same fire that had warmed this room during countless Boston blizzards. The same room that once echoed with warmth and laughter instead of this palpable tension. "Julian, your history with investments. Don't." He pointed a finger at me, the gesture sharp and accusatory. "Don't you dare throw my past ventures in my face. This is different. This is my chance to finally make my own mark." Finally make his own mark. As if the sprawling house in Wellesley I'd helped them secure, the Ivy League education I'd funded for him, the 2 luxury cars I'd co-signed for, as if none of that counted because his 4th revolutionary startup had fizzled out. "I understand your passion for this, but I cannot risk. Then sell this old mausoleum." He cut in, the words sharp and clearly rehearsed. He had been building up to this. "It's far too big for you anyway. You're just rattling around in here like a ghost in a museum. Get a nice condo in the seaport. One of those modern senior living places with a concierge." The room fell utterly silent, save for the soft hiss of the burning birch logs. I felt my jaw clench, my knuckles whitening as I gripped the biography. "This house is my home, Julian. I designed it. I built it with your mother. Mom's been gone for 6 years, Dad. 6 years. His voice rose, bouncing off the high, coffered ceilings. "You can't live in a shrine forever. Be practical. The Beacon Hill real estate market is insane. You could clear 3 million easy. Maybe 4. 3 million easy." As if the kitchen where Eleanor taught him how to bake her famous apple pie was just an asset to be liquidated. As if the garden where we'd built his childhood treehouse held no more value than its current tax assessment. "I am not selling my home, Julian." Something in his expression shifted then. The practiced disappointment hardened into a colder, uglier resolve. "You're too old and stubborn to see the big picture. While you're sitting here, clutching your precious memories, The real world is passing you by. He snatched his cashmere coat from the sofa, his movements jerky with barely suppressed fury. Clarissa was right. It's impossible to reason with you anymore. The heavy front door slammed with a force that rattled the framed blueprints on the wall, the very first drafts of this house. Through the bay window, I watched the headlights of his Porsche cut a swath across the snow-dusted cobblestones before vanishing into the cold February night. I sat there, listening to the old house settle around me, the warmth of the fire unable to penetrate the profound chill his words had left behind. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 9, marking the end of what I had naively hoped would be a pleasant visit. Instead, I had seen a part of my son I had been desperately trying to ignore for years, the cold, calculating mind of a man who now viewed his own father not as family, but as a financial obstacle. The biography slipped from my lap and fell to the floor with a soft thud as I leaned my head back, suddenly feeling the full weight of my 74 years. The untouched glass of Glenlivet sat on the side table, its amber depths catching the firelight. My joints groaned in protest as I pushed myself up from the wingback chair. The house, my sanctuary, suddenly felt vast and hollow in the wake of Julian's departure. The familiar rooms seemed to stretch into unfamiliar shadows. I made my way to the built-in library, flipping on the green-shaded banker's lamp that Eleanor had bought me for our 30th anniversary. Its warm glow illuminated the mahogany shelves, filled not just with books on architecture and history, but with decades of family photographs in silver frames. This room had always been my sanctum, the place where designs were born, where life-altering decisions were weighed and made. The large, leather-bound scrapbook was on its usual shelf, thick and heavy with the tangible weight of memory. I pulled it down with care, the worn cover soft beneath my fingers, and settled into the reading chair by the window. The first page held a photo of Julian, age 4, a gap-toothed grin on his face as he placed the final block on an impossibly tall Lego tower on this very library floor. Eleanor's elegant script was written in white ink below. June 10, 1991. Our little architect. I could almost hear her proud, melodic laughter filling the quiet room. I turned the page slowly, almost reverently. Julian at 7, proudly holding up his first blueprint, a crayon drawing of a fantastical castle, my guiding hand just visible at the edge of the paper. He had been so earnest, so eager to follow in my footsteps. Daddy, I'm going to build bigger buildings than you. The memory of his high, clear voice seemed to whisper from the photograph. My fingers traced the edge of another picture, our trip to see falling water when he was 13. He'd been awestruck, staring at Wright's masterpiece with a look of pure wonder. We had spent the entire car ride home talking about cantilevers, organic architecture, and the harmony between structure and nature. It was the kind of effortless, soul-deep conversation that forges the strongest bonds between a father and a son. The scotch I'd poured remained untouched as I continued my journey through the pages. High school graduation, Julian beaming in his cap and gown, valedictorian of his class. The celebratory dinner at La Lanterna, his favorite North End restaurant, after he got his acceptance letter to Harvard. The pride in his eyes when he called to tell me about his first internship at a prestigious firm. When did it all change? When did that bright, creative boy who wanted to build great things transform into the man who stood in my study tonight, viewing me as nothing more than a stubborn gatekeeper to his inheritance? I found the wedding photos near the end of the album. Julian, impossibly handsome in his tailored tuxedo. Clarissa, stunning in a designer gown. Even then, I'd sensed a certain calculating ambition in her gaze, though I'd dismissed it as a young woman's drive. Eleanor, already weakened by her first round of chemo, had whispered to me during the reception, "She's very focused, Arthur. She'll keep him grounded." Focused? Yes, Clarissa had certainly helped him focus. On status, on networking, on the perception of wealth, and on what my estate could one day provide for them. The pages felt heavier as I moved into recent years. Fewer photographs, shorter, more perfunctory visits, conversations that revolved around market trends and investment opportunities, not family and shared passions. When had I stopped being dad and become the bank of dad? I closed the album gently, but I couldn't bring myself to put it away. I held it to my chest, feeling the immense weight of all those captured moments. All that love and hope and promise that seemed to have dissolved somewhere between childhood dreams and the harsh realities of adult ambition. The clock chimed 11, its deep, resonant tones marking the hours. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall, dusting the bare branches of the Japanese maple in the garden. A tree we'd planted on the day Julian was born. Where did I go wrong? When did my son, my little architect, become this stranger who saw my home, the masterpiece of my life, as nothing more than an asset to be liquidated? I finally picked up the glass and took a sip of the Glenlivet. The smoky peat burned a welcome path down my throat, but it did little to warm the cold dread settling in my heart. I sat there, surrounded by the ghosts of better days, wondering if the son I had raised with such love still existed somewhere beneath the polished, ruthless man who had stormed out of my life tonight. Morning light, pale and wintry, slanted through the tall kitchen windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I measured out the coffee beans with the methodical precision of an architect drawing a final plan. The familiar ritual, grinding, measuring, the bloom of the hot water over the grounds, was a small, solid anchor in the sea of turmoil that had been my night. The coffee maker began its comforting gurgle as I stood at the window, watching a blue jay squabble with a squirrel over the seeds I'd scattered on the feeder. The snow had blanketed the small garden, turning the wrought iron bench Eleanor had loved into a soft, white sculpture. Steam curled from my favorite mug as I sat at the antique trestle table, the same spot where I had sketched out designs, helped Julian with his homework, and read the morning paper for 40 years. This morning, however, the familiar comfort was replaced by a stark, painful clarity that only a sleepless night of introspection can bring. The question had circled my thoughts relentlessly. When, precisely, did Julian change? The wedding. I could see it now, with the unflinching honesty born of deep disappointment. It began in the months after their extravagant honeymoon in the Maldives. Clarissa's influence began to reshape my son's priorities. A slow, steady erosion like water on stone. It was subtle at first. Missed Sunday dinners due to networking events. Phone calls that grew shorter, more transactional. "Dad, you just don't understand how modern business works," he'd said last Thanksgiving, waving away my advice on his then-current startup. Clarissa had smiled that polished, approving smile, her perfectly manicured hand resting on his arm in a gesture that was both supportive and possessive. I walked over to the mahogany secretary desk that had been Eleanor's, pulling open the bottom drawer where I kept old papers. A box of Julian's letters from his college architecture program was tied with a faded red ribbon. His handwriting then was full of energy and passion. "Dad, thank you for the check for my supplies. I know what a sacrifice this is, and I promise I'll make you proud. I can't wait to join the firm and build something real with you." Build something real with me. When had that dream been demolished? When did the desire for partnership crumble into a desire for replacement, and finally, for dismissal? The transformation hadn't been an overnight demolition. It was a carefully managed renovation of his character, overseen by a woman who saw my life's work as the foundation for her future. I recalled Clarissa's passive-aggressive comments about my old-fashioned business principles, her subtle suggestions that I was holding Julian back, her gentle but relentless campaign to reframe me as an obstacle rather than a source of support. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, but I barely registered it. The pieces of a puzzle I had been too close to, too emotionally invested in to see, were now clicking into place with grim finality. The phone calls that came only when a down payment was needed or a business loan required co-signing. The birthday visits that felt more like obligatory shareholder meetings. The way Julian's eyes had started to scan the details of my home, not with nostalgia, but with an appraiser's cold calculation. When did the value of things become more important than the love of people? The kitchen clock ticked toward 9 a.m. Across the river in Wellesley, Julian and Clarissa were likely already strategizing, discussing how to handle the stubborn old man and his inconvenient attachment to his home. The thought, which should have brought a fresh wave of pain, instead ignited something else within me. A cold, hard resolve I hadn't felt since my early days, when I was a young architect fighting for my first major commission against bigger, more established firms. I had built a legacy through careful planning, foresight, and an unwillingness to be bullied. I had outlasted rivals and weathered economic downturns that had crushed lesser men. Perhaps it was time to remind my son that his father hadn't built a life and a fortune by being a fool. The phone buzzed on the counter, startling me from my reverie. The caller ID displayed Julian's name. For a fleeting moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But that was the old Arthur's response. I picked it up on the fourth ring. "Hello, Julian. Dad." His voice was stripped of last night's fury, replaced by the smooth, practiced charm he used in boardrooms. I wanted to apologize for my behavior. I was out of line. "Clarissa and I would love to take you to dinner tonight. La Lanterna, your favorite. We really need to talk." A week of silence stretched between that frigid February evening and the moment my phone rang again. Had spent those 7 days in a state of quiet preparation, maintaining my daily routines while my mind worked with the focused intensity of an architect finalizing a complex design. Morning coffee, afternoon reading, and in the evenings not walks but meetings with my lawyer. The call came as I was tidying my drafting table, the simple act of sharpening pencils and aligning rulers providing a sense of order amidst the chaos. Julian's name glowed on the screen, and I let it ring twice before answering, a small but significant shift in our power dynamic. "Hello, Julian. Dad." His voice was carefully modulated, a performance of calm reason. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about our conversation. Clarissa and I would like to take you to dinner tomorrow. La Lanterna, your favorite. We need to talk. La Lanterna." He remembered it was where Eleanor and I celebrated every anniversary. The choice was a calculated piece of emotional manipulation. About what, exactly? I kept my tone neutral, professional, the voice I'd used to negotiate multimillion-dollar contracts. "About your future, Dad. We're genuinely worried about you, all alone in that huge house. We want to discuss some options that could make your life easier." Options. Such a sterile, loaded word. "Very well, Julian. 7 o'clock. Perfect. I'll book the table." After I hung up, I stood in the study, phone in hand, and looked at my reflection in the dark glass of a framed architectural award. The week had given me time to think, to plan, to make certain arrangements. Perhaps it was time my son learned a fundamental principle of architecture. A weak foundation cannot support a grand design, and his was built on sand. That evening, I chose my attire with the same meticulous care I would for a groundbreaking ceremony. A charcoal gray suit that Eleanor had insisted I buy years ago, saying it made my silver hair look distinguished. A deep blue tie that suggested authority without being ostentatious. In the mirror, I saw not the frail, confused old man Julian seemed to envision, but the founder of Vance and Associates, a man who had outmaneuvered city planners, stubborn contractors, and cutthroat developers. From the safe in my study, I retrieved the manila folder I'd been compiling with my attorney, Helen Croft. Inside were documents, legal, financial, and personal, that would serve as the foundation for the lesson I was about to teach. The taxi arrived at precisely 6:30. As the Boston skyline grew closer, its lights twinkling against the deepening twilight, I felt the familiar weight of the folder in my hand. Tomorrow would bring either a long overdue reckoning or a final, painful severance. Either way, my son was about to discover that some old structures have reinforcements you can't see from the outside. The warm lighting and soft jazz of La Lanterna did little to mask the cloying tension at table 7. Julian stood as I approached, his smile a fraction too wide, too practiced. Clarissa remained seated, offering a perfectly manicured wave, her expression a careful blend of concern and pity. "Dad, you look fantastic," Julian said, his embrace feeling hollow and performative. I took the chair they'd designated for me. It faced a brick wall, I noted, while their seats commanded a panoramic view of the restaurant. Even the seating was a power play. "Clarissa, you're looking well." I nodded to my daughter-in-law. Her diamond earrings, a gift from me on their 5th anniversary, caught the candlelight. "Oh, Arthur, we're just so glad you came," she cooed. her voice dripping with the synthetic sweetness she reserved for difficult conversations. We've been so worried. Worried. There was that word again. They'd rehearsed this. The waiter took our orders. An expensive Barolo for them, sparkling water for me. I'd learned long ago that clarity of mind was the most valuable asset in any negotiation. As he departed, Julian leaned in, his face a mask of feigned filial concern. Dad, Clarissa and I have been talking about your situation, living alone, rattling around in that big house. If something were to happen. Nothing has happened, Julian, I said, my voice even. My fingers found the edge of the folder under the table. I am perfectly fine. Are you, though? Clarissa interjected, her laugh like the tinkle of ice in an empty glass. Honestly, Arthur, when was the last time you saw a doctor for a proper cognitive screening? You're 74. She said the number as if it were a terminal diagnosis. Julian reached under the table and placed a sleek leather briefcase on it. The metallic snaps echoed in the intimate space. We found a solution, he announced, pulling out a stack of glossy brochures and placing them between us. Golden Horizons Living. The name was offensively cheerful. It's a wonderful facility. Private suites, 24/7 medical staff, gourmet dining, curated social activities. The words felt like stones being hurled at me. A nursing home. I picked up the top brochure, my hand steady despite the seismic shift happening in my chest. We've already started the application, Clarissa added brightly. The wait list is usually months long, but we have connections. We could have you settled in by next Friday. Next Friday. 4 days from now. I leafed through the accompanying paperwork they'd brought. Medical history forms, financial disclosure agreements, power of attorney documents. My signature was required in dozens of places, but theirs, as concerned family members, already adorned every page it could. You've been very busy, I managed to say, my own voice sounding distant. We want what's best for you, Dad, Julian said, his tone infuriatingly patient, as if explaining something to a child. The house is a liability. The proceeds from the sale will fund your care for the rest of your life. Comfortably. The rest of my life. Neatly planned, tidily executed. My home sold, my independence stripped away, my assets managed by the very people who were orchestrating my confinement. I'm not going anywhere, I said, placing the brochures face down on the tablecloth. Clarissa's tinkling laugh returned. Oh, Arthur, don't be difficult. It's for your own good. I will not permit you to dismantle my life. The words were louder than I intended, causing the couple at the next table to glance over. Julian's face darkened, the charming facade cracking. Dismantle your life? He leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. Look at you. You're defensive, you're confused. You can't even have a rational conversation. I am not confused about a single thing, Julian. I pushed the Golden Horizons packet back towards him. I see exactly what this is. Clarissa's phone, which had been lying on the table, lifted slightly. She angled it towards me, the small black lens a cold, unblinking eye. Her lips curved into a slight, anticipatory smile. The glass of Merlot sat beside Julian's plate, its deep red contents shimmering in the candlelight. His fingers curled around its stem, his knuckles white. You want proof you can't manage on your own? His voice was a low growl, laced with a wild, desperate energy that was utterly foreign to me. You want proof you're not fit to make your own decisions? Fine. Here's your proof. In what felt like slow motion, his arm swung up. The Merlot arced through the air, a graceful crimson ribbon against the restaurant's ambient glow. It hit me squarely on the chest and face. The initial shock was the cold liquid, quickly followed by the sharp, fruity scent of the wine. It soaked my tie, spread in a dark, ugly stain across the front of my white shirt, and dripped from my jaw onto the pristine tablecloth. See? Julian slammed the empty glass down, the sound cracking through the now silent restaurant. I just threw wine on you in a public place. You're too old, too slow, too senile to even react. You just sit there, helpless. Clarissa's gasp was pure theater. Oh my God. Julian. See, Arthur? This is what we mean. Your response times. They're just not there. Around us, a bubble of silence had formed. Waitstaff stood frozen mid-stride. A man at a nearby table was already reaching for his phone, his expression a mixture of shock and disgust. With movements that felt deliberate and detached, I reached for my linen napkin. I methodically blotted my cheek and chin, the fabric instantly turning a deep burgundy. My son. My own son. The boy whose crude crayon blueprints I had framed and cherished, had just assaulted and humiliated me in public to manufacture evidence for his grotesque power grab. The wine stain on my shirt felt like a brand. I could smell its cloying sweetness mixed with the aroma of garlic and fresh bread. My hands, surprisingly steady, folded the soiled napkin into a neat square and placed it beside my untouched water glass. Julian leaned back, a look of savage triumph on his face. There. Now maybe someone will listen to us. Now maybe they'll see what we've been dealing with. Clarissa's phone was now openly recording me. This is perfect for the competency hearing, I heard her whisper to him. Clear evidence of diminished capacity and inappropriate emotional response. The maitre d' was now hurrying toward our table, his face a canvas of professional composure stretched over obvious alarm. Sir, is everything all right? Should I call someone? Everything is perfectly fine, I said, my voice clear and carrying in the unnaturally quiet room. Just a family matter that has now reached its conclusion. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket, my fingers brushing past the folder. They closed around the documents I had prepared for this very moment, the culmination of 7 decades of careful planning and strategic thought. My fingers found the papers that would prove to my son, his wife, and this entire restaurant that some old architects still know how to build an unbreakable case. The wine-soaked napkin lay on the table like a surrendered flag. My hands, however, were rock steady as I stood up, feeling the collective gaze of the entire restaurant settle upon me. Julian remained slouched in his chair, a smug, predatory look in his eyes, while Clarissa held her phone aloft like a trophy, ready to capture my final, pathetic capitulation. Instead, I reached into my inner jacket pocket. The first item I produced was a check. Crisp, white, and drawn from my personal account. The amount, written in my own clear architectural script, was for $1 million. Pay to the order of Julian Vance. It was dated a week ago. This was for your new business. My voice rang out, clear and steady in the hushed dining room. I had it drawn up after our first conversation, before I truly understood the depths of your greed. Julian's smugness vanished, replaced by a wide-eyed, ravenous stare fixed on the check. Dad, what are you? But now I see you are not a builder. You are a demolitions expert. The first tear was clean, straight down the middle, bisecting the $1 million figure. You threw wine on your father to prove he was helpless, to steal his home. No. What are you doing? Julian surged forward, his chair screeching against the floor as he lunged across the table, his manicured fingers clawing at the air. Clarissa's phone dropped to the table with a clatter, her digital proof gathering forgotten in the face of a disappearing fortune. Arthur, stop. Think about this. We can talk. The second tear was horizontal, creating 4 perfect squares of paper that drifted down onto the wine-stained tablecloth like bitter confetti. It's too late for talk. You made your choice when you decided my life was an inconvenience standing between you and my money. I scattered the pieces across the table, a mosaic of their shattered entitlement. You wanted to put me in a home. You tried to prove I was incompetent. Well, here is my proof that I am not. From my pocket, I now withdrew the manila folder. I opened it and began laying out its contents like a winning hand in poker. This, I said, placing a document on the table, is a full psychiatric evaluation, conducted 2 days ago by Dr. Alistair Finch, confirming I am of perfectly sound mind. This, I continued, adding another sheet, is a report from the Department of Elder Services, following a home visit you anonymously requested. It states I am living in a safe environment and am fully capable of self-care. And this, I said, my voice dropping slightly, is a security report from my bank, detailing your attempt last Wednesday to have yourself added to my accounts by falsely claiming I had dementia. Julian's face went white. Clarissa looked like she was going to be sick. And finally, I placed a last, heavy sheaf of papers on the pile. These are printouts of your wife's social media posts, complete with legal analysis from my attorney, outlining a clear, premeditated campaign of defamation and harassment. You weren't just concerned. You were building a fraudulent case, and you documented every step of it for me. Julian frantically scrambled to gather the pieces of the torn check. We can tape it. The bank will still honor it. The bank will not, I said, my voice cold as a Boston winter. Because as of this morning, I have placed a permanent stop payment on that check number. I looked him directly in the eye. Goodbye, Julian. The maitre d' quickly stepped aside as I walked towards the exit, my posture erect, my stride unwavering. Behind me, I could hear the beginnings of a frantic, whispered argument between Julian and Clarissa, the sound of their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. The crisp night air felt clean on my face as I stepped out onto the street, leaving behind not just a restaurant, but the wreckage of a relationship that had been poisoned by greed. Safely in my folder was the most important document of all, a freshly executed last will and testament. My son's real lesson in consequences was only just beginning. March arrived, melting the last of the dirty snow and bringing a fragile promise of spring to the city. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at La Lanterna. 3 weeks of profound, unnerving silence from Julian and Clarissa, a silence that felt less like peace and more like the drawing of a deep breath before a final, desperate scream. I was enjoying my morning coffee when the doorbell chimed. It was Mrs. Gable from next door, her expression a careful mixture of neighborly concern and undisguised curiosity. Arthur, good morning, she began, clutching a bundle of letters. I do hope I'm not disturbing you, but I've been hearing the most troubling rumors. I invited her into the foyer, a neutral space. What sort of rumors, Eleanor? Well, she shifted uncomfortably. A few people in the neighborhood association have mentioned you might be struggling a bit, forgetting things. There's talk that your son is trying to get you some help, but you're resisting. So the next phase of their campaign had begun. A grassroots smear campaign. I appreciate the concern, Eleanor, but I assure you, my mind is as sharp as it ever was. Her relief was palpable, but it was followed by a new line of inquiry. Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Though, I did hear something about you wandering out late at night. Are you sure everything is all right? Wandering. A fabrication, of course. I hadn't left the house after 8 p.m. in weeks. After Mrs. Gable left, the phone began to ring. It was David Chen, my old partner from the firm. Arthur, it's David. Listen, I got a strange call from Julian yesterday. He sounded terribly worried. Said you'd been missing appointments, letting bills pile up. He asked if I knew any good estate lawyers who specialize in transitioning assets for incapacitated seniors. Incapacitated seniors. The language was specific, legal, and chilling. 3 more calls followed from old friends and colleagues, each one relaying a similar story, a different fabricated detail of my supposed decline. Julian and Clarissa were no longer just gossiping. They were poisoning the well, systematically creating a chorus of concerned voices they could later call upon as witnesses. That afternoon, I logged onto my computer, a device they seemed to believe I was incapable of operating, and navigated to Clarissa's Instagram page. It was a masterclass in subtle, vicious manipulation. A softly filtered photo of her and Julian looking stressed, with a caption, "Navigating the difficult journey of elder care with a loved one who can't see they need help. It's the hardest thing we've ever done. #FamilyFirst, #ElderCareJourney, #difficult decisions." The comments section was a viper's nest of sympathy and validation for her narrative. So sorry you're going through this. We had to get guardianship for my father. It was the only way. Another, it's heartbreaking when they lose their insight. You're doing the right thing by stepping in. She was crowdsourcing my character assassination. I meticulously took screenshots, cataloging each post, each comment, adding it to the file Helen Croft and I were building. By day's end, I had a clear picture of their new strategy. If they couldn't prove I was incompetent through medical channels, they would create a public perception of incompetence so overwhelming that any future action I took would be viewed through a lens of suspicion. But they had made a critical miscalculation. They assumed the architect was incapable of seeing the flaws in their design. They had forgotten that my entire life was built on understanding structure, stress points, and the inevitable collapse of poorly supported facades. I dialed my attorney's number. Some wars are won in the courtroom. This one would be won before it ever got there. The mahogany conference room at Croft and Associates offered a commanding view of Boston Harbor. I laid my new evidence across the gleaming table, the screenshots, the logged phone calls, the notarized statement from Mrs. Gable about the wandering rumors. Helen Croft reviewed it all, her expression grim. They're building a narrative for a guardianship petition, Arthur. It's textbook. They'll argue that even if you can pass a cognitive test, your day-to-day judgment is impaired, and they'll use these concerned friends as anecdotal evidence. So what do? We get there first, she said, a glint in her eye. We don't defend. We attack. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived at Julian and Clarissa's Wellesley home. It was not a plea for reconciliation. It was a cease and desist order, drafted by Helen, accusing them of defamation, slander, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, complete with an appendix of their social media posts and a detailed log of their campaign of harassment. It warned that any further action, including filing a guardianship petition, would be met with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Their response was not silence, but escalation. A week later, I received a formal notice. Julian had filed the petition for emergency guardianship, citing my erratic behavior, financial mismanagement, and refusal to accept necessary care. The hearing was set for the following month. They had walked directly into the trap. The courtroom felt cold and impersonal. Julian and Clarissa sat at the plaintiff's table with their lawyer, looking solemn and concerned. Julian testified first, his voice breaking as he described my confusion, my paranoia, and the heartbreaking incident at the restaurant where I had a psychotic break and destroyed a symbolic gift. Their lawyer then called David Chun to the stand. He looked uncomfortable. Yes, he admitted. Julian called me expressing concern. He said Arthur was missing bills. And did you believe him? Their lawyer pressed. At first, David said. But then I called Arthur's accountant, who I've known for 30 years. She confirmed his accounts were in perfect order. It seemed odd. One by one, their witnesses told a similar story. Yes, Julian had called them. Yes, he had sounded worried. But upon minimal investigation, his claims fell apart. The foundation of their case began to crumble. Then Helen called me to the stand. I walked calmly, folder in hand. For an hour, she led me through my finances, my daily routines, my social life. I was clear, articulate, and precise. Finally, she turned to the events at La Lanterna. Mr. Vance, your son claims you had a psychotic break. Can you tell the court what happened? I looked directly at the judge. My son and his wife attempted to coerce me into signing documents that would grant them power of attorney and commit me to a senior living facility against my will. When I refused, my son physically assaulted me by throwing a glass of wine in my face to humiliate me and create evidence of my senility. What he perceived as a psychotic break was, in fact, a carefully considered response. I then presented the evidence: the psychiatric evaluation, the elder services report, the bank security memo, and finally, the cease and desist letter they had ignored. The judge's expression grew colder with each document. She looked from the evidence to Julian and Clarissa, whose faces had drained of all color. The petition for guardianship is denied with prejudice, the judge announced, her voice like cracking ice. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for a possible investigation into elder abuse and attempted fraud. The sound of the gavel felt like the final nail being driven into a coffin they had built for me, but had ended up occupying themselves. 3 months later, I sat in the sun-drenched courtyard of the Boston Architectural College, a panelist on a scholarship committee. We had just awarded the first annual Eleanor Vance Memorial Scholarship to a brilliant, underprivileged young woman from Dorchester whose passion for design reminded me so much of myself at that age. "Mr. Vance," she said, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you. You've given me a future. You earned it," I told her. "Now go build something beautiful." My life had found a new, quieter rhythm. My friendships, tested by Julian's campaign, had emerged stronger and more authentic. David and I had lunch every Tuesday. Mrs. Gable and I now exchanged gardening tips over the fence. The house, once a silent monument to the past, was now frequently filled with the lively conversation of friends and colleagues. The legal battle had concluded as expected. Faced with a mountain of evidence and a potential criminal investigation, Julian and Clarissa had signed a legally binding agreement to have no further contact with me in exchange for my promise not to pursue the civil suit. I found my legacy not in a bloodline, but in the futures I could help build. The bulk of my estate was now legally entrusted to a foundation that would fund architectural scholarships and support elder advocacy groups, ensuring my life's work would protect others from the kind of predatory greed I had experienced. One evening, as I sat in my study, sketching ideas for a new community library, I found the old box of Julian's college letters. I untied the red ribbon and read through them one last time. The words of the bright, hopeful young man who had wanted to build things with his father. There was a pang of sadness, a ghost of the love that had been lost. But it was not a consuming grief. It was the quiet acknowledgement of a demolition that had been necessary to make way for new construction. I placed the letters in the fireplace, and as the flames consumed the paper, turning the ink to ash, I felt a final sense of peace. I hadn't lost a son. I had lost an illusion, and in its place, I had found a purpose that was stronger, more enduring, and built on a foundation of true worth. The summer evening was quiet, filled with the scent of blooming roses from the garden and the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock. The house was no longer a fortress or a shrine, but simply a home, filled with peace and the quiet contentment of a life well lived, and a future, finally, of my own design. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts on the story in the comments. We look forward to reading them. To hear the next story, click on the video on your screen now. Thank you for listening.